Welcome to the panel called The Eisner Effect on American Publishing. This is really an industry type inside look at the development of the category of graphic novels across the spectrum, whether it's the direct market or book trade involving libraries and classrooms. And up here on the dais with me are people who represent each of those spaces. Immediately to my left here, Kevin Votel is you're the official VP of Marketing and Business Development, is that correct? Yeah. Okay. Next to him is Caitlyn Zaksheske. She's a high school librarian and also from Yuma, Arizona, also the recipient of the 2015 ALA Will Eisner graphic novel Grant, which is pretty exciting. She does some pretty amazing things, and every time I ask to tell her that she's extraordinary, she just kind of looks at me like, okay. To her left, Judy Hansen, Will Eisner's agent, and a very, very brilliant inside person within the industry. And then to her left is Charlie Kochman from Abrams, and do I just say from Abrams, or do I add ComicArts there as well?
Abrams.
Okay. So in the discussion that we're having here is that Kevin is now a person. He's got a son. It's official. Thank you. Is that Mr. Eisner gets a lot of credit for things in the industry that have created the momentum for where we are, whether it's a contract with God or the idea that graphic novels should be considered on the same level as standard literature. And then because of those things, you've had these pinnacle moments throughout the past 20, 30 years that have evolved, mainly because Will was one of the people to kick the ball and keep it rolling. And I want to start with Charlie. You've kind of been around for a little bit. You've seen some stuff, and you've been part of some really successful things. How much has this industry changed? Now, let's talk about the book trade, whether that encompasses libraries and schools, from your perspective, because the category is mature. Is that a good way of putting it?
Yeah, I mean, I can say I've been going to Comic-Con since 1993, and I think the biggest change is that there are publishers here, not comic book publishers, but book publishers. So that's obviously a big change. And I think having graphic novel sections in stores like Barnes & Noble are, major sort of significant changes, things that Will put in place when he was looking for what he called a real publisher for a contract with God. It wasn't just a regular comics publisher he wanted to Variant because they were a New York publisher and they were not a comic book publisher. He was looking for a different way to have the book be found in the bookstores and a different section of the bookstore rather than the funny books or whatever. So I think things have changed a lot. I think that, for me, probably the biggest change is that stereotype of the gatekeepers of librarians. The old librarian with her nose turned down at comics, like they're all gone. They don't exist anymore. It's all people our age who grew up reading comics who love the fact that kids are reading comics. So the gatekeepers are comics fans, and whether they're teachers, librarians, they embrace comics because it gets kids to read. So, and that's something that's definitely happened in the last 10 or 15 years.
And if you want to remind you, if you have questions, hang on just a second. If you have a question, please feel free to raise your hand and we will bring that on into the conversation. Go ahead, Judy.
So I think that those are the main points I wanted to make. There's a good point that Paul makes in the card that I gave you. Paul Levitt's wrote a book on Will Eisner, and he makes the point where everything that Will was doing was leading up to what's happening now. And somebody said it was like Moses leading everybody to the promised land. Will didn't live to get there, but he pushed everybody in that direction and led to what is basically now the acceptance of comics in a mainstream way, whether it's in movies or bookstores or libraries or school book fairs.
Now, the next question I got for you is kind of a crazy leap for some people, but the connection between a contract with God and now with Diary of a Wimpy Kid, changing the landscape in a couple places, but it resonates well in the schools, is that the legend I've heard is that it was miscatalogued for a lot of people as a graphic novel. And so you've got buyers that have picked it up, but can you make a connection between the two?
Well, so I edit the Diary of a Wimpy Kid series, so that's the connection for me. We pitched it as a Would Be Kid as a middle grade series, not a comic series, but at its core, it uses word balloons and storytelling that's part of it. So it's got the DNA of comics. Jeff Kinney is a comics fan. That's where it comes from. So it's not a traditional comics where it's like panels and balloons, but it's word balloons and all the iconography that goes along with it. But comic fans found it, and it was all because we published it at Abrams, and then Scholastic picked it up 6 months later. And because Scholastic published Bone, it was like people who were looking for something else to read after they finished Bone. This is, before Raina started doing Smile and everything, and really significantly, Would Be Kid was another comics book that they could, kids could read.
Now, I'm going to now throw the ball over to Kate, because as a grant recipient for the ALA Eisner Award, it was the Innovators Grant that you won, correct?
No, it was the growth.
Oh, it was the Growth Grant. But there are some things that she does with her program at her high school library where the reception from your educators has been warm, cold, good, great. How do you feel, and what do you offer them as far as reading support and programs?
There are always skeptical teachers and administrators who don't really think that the graphic novel medium is a serious medium. But when I started my efforts, I started with the departments and the teachers I already had a good relationship with. And mainly I started working with the literature department in our English department, and it was a really great response. I worked with them and collaborated with them to create a whole graphic novel unit that the students did. Entire classes of literature students came into the library and checked out a graphic novel and did book reports on graphic novels, which you don't really see in a lot of high schools right now, and we're working to improve that. So the people who I reached out to who I knew were going to respond well did respond well. It's a challenge to kind of branch out of the English department for me. I'm hoping to maybe get into the history department with Ethan Hales, Hazardous Tales at some point, but right now I'm focusing on the English department because they're the most responsive.
And involved in it, does local retail figure into this, or are you buying your books through like Baker Taylor or one of the jobbers?
I'm using our vendors that are approved by our district. Mostly I use Paulette, but I would hope that the local retailers could be a part of that. It's not really in the cards in my area. We don't have a lot of major retailers that are involved in the schools at all, and our district has kind of a strict policy on only using approved vendors. When I do collaborate in our local area, it's usually with the public library or the local game store, like the card game store,
Okay.
like GameStop.
So, Kevin Votel, from the distribution side of the picture, what have you guys seen from your perspective on the development of the category for both, either whether it's trade or any other part of the industry that you deal with?
I think that because we're in the distribution side, we've had the opportunity to work with multiple different publishers in the category, and we've continued to see growth in the area. But I think that there's a lot more opportunity, particularly in the trade independent market. As I was talking to John before we started the program, a lot of the buyers skew a bit older, who buy for bookstores, independent bookstores, and so their familiarity with the content is, not particularly great, and they don't have a way to actually really embrace the content. They obviously identify with Wimpy Kid and Bone and certain publications, but the breadth of books that they have in their stores, typically on the independent side, is a bit lacking. So I think that we see that there's a tremendous opportunity within the independent trade bookseller market to continue to grow and expand our footprint in stores. But I think a lot of it has to do with educating buyers and developing interest that a lot of the buyers don't necessarily have at this point in terms of interest and knowledge.
Now, the next question, I'm going to take over to Judy Hansen. We were talking also earlier outside of some of the moments that are catalysts for getting us to this point. Because if you have Contract with God, without Contract with God, you have these other books that never would have made it in the category because they didn't have somebody to open the door, especially with Will taking the book to Norton, correct?
Yeah, I think that, well, there's a couple of events that I think are sort of important historically. One was the publication of A Contract with God, which at the time, there was a lot of superhero material, but what was special about that, about Will's book, was that the story was rooted in personal experiences and the cultural experiences of the author, rather than this superhero. And I think that was an important beginning in terms of it becoming literary and character-based. And that was a very important first step. And if you extend, after A Contract with God, you see the influence of that kind of storytelling. And in addition, Will was also an educator, and he did these wonderful reference books and graphic storytelling, comics, and sequential art. So not only was he telling good stories and then continued to do graphic novels, that he was also playing the role of actually trying to show people how to create quality comics through his reference work and his teaching at SVA. In terms of sort of a timeline, I really feel like The Contract with God was like a seminal work. He influenced Scott McCloud, and Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics, which came out in the mid-90s, I think was a very important next step from a more of a mass market potential of getting people who may not be comics fans, but at least getting it out in the marketplace. When I sold Scott's Understanding Comics to HarperCollins, which is a major trade publisher at the time, which was not in the comics business, but they were willing to publish Understanding Comics because they saw it as sort of a reference work. That was another next step in getting comic-related material or understanding about comics format into the general marketplace. And I know from Jim Killen, who was the buyer at B&N, Borders was still existing at the time, but he said that was a very important book for him to be able to, and because the sales were good, to be able to use that as sort of linchpin to grow his category, add in more literary graphic novels into the list. And so I think that was another next step. But I think another key next step in the growth of literary comics into the trade book market happened when Kitchen Sink Press went under. They had traditionally published Will's original graphic novels, and we needed to find a home for Will's literary graphic novels after the implosion of KSP. So we went to DC Comics because they were going to publish the Spirit Archives and the literary graphic novels. So that was staying within the comic space, but trying to find a sort of a home for the library of Will's books. The experience at DC was mixed. They did very nice Spirit Archives, but they were still a comics publisher. They were working with Diamond for distribution, and they were not able to move the literary graphic novels and publish them and get the shelf space that a regular trade publisher might be able to do. So we got the rights reverted from DC and moved to W.W. Norton for most of the literary graphic novels, and that I think was a seminal event. And the reason I think that was important is because Norton was the largest independent publisher, independent, not owned by a big conglomerate, owned by employees. They were very literary, and they were known for keeping works in print, whereas a lot of other publishers, after a certain window of time, they would remainder and take books out of print. But Norton was known for keeping books in print. And the fact that we first sold The Plot, which was a very important book, at auction among trade book houses, and Norton came to the table with the best offer, and they were open to publishing Will's and other literary graphic novels, meant that we finally had a trade book house recognizing the value and significance of these books in the marketplace and making a commitment to keeping them there. That was an important point because prior to that, you had the occasional graphic novel, literary graphic novel at a Pantheon or a Random House or a Berkeley, but having this consolidated oeuvre of an important figure, that made a statement in the industry. And it was at that point that we were able to start to see interest from other trade publishers in this work. I know when I sold this series of Will's books, I had talked with a number of the major publishers, all of which passed. But they were, they didn't want to make a commitment to publishing so many books and keeping them in print. Norton did. And I think that was a very important moment for other publishers to see, oh, literary house like Norton is going to commit to this many books. And so that I think was another next stage in the building of the category at retail. I think was an important demarcation. And then seeing...
Can I comment on that for a
Yeah.
second? I was at DC Comics when we were publishing Will's backlist in addition to The Spirit, and Paul Lewis tells the story that, you have to understand, if a publisher has the rights to something, you don't want the rights to go back. Even if they're not selling what you want them to be, if you're publishing it, you want to keep publishing it. So it was a very unusual request from Will's part to DC to say, I want to get these rights and I want to give it to another publisher to do. And Paul was like, well, look, the books are just coming out. We're building a program. It's going to take time. And Will's response to Paul was, yeah, but I don't have the time. He was in his 80s and he wanted to make sure that he was in good health at the time, but he wanted to make sure that his books were at a home where they could stay. And Paul couldn't argue with that. And I think that was really important. The other point I want to respond to that you had made, which I thought was interesting, if you ever listen to a famous comedian talk to another famous comedian, they always reference some other comedian that you've never heard of, and they're like, oh, he was the best joke teller ever, and you're like, how did I not know this person? When Contract with God came out, Will was very well known, but it wasn't like Contract with God came out and it was a bestseller. It made a difference to the people who knew Will and the other creators, not the consumers so much, but the real shift was other creators were looking at what Will had done, and that was really important to them, and really inspired them to create their own work. And Judy's right that the big difference was this was when superheroes were all that was being done, and Will took a personal story. He didn't tell a superhero story. He told a story about humans and people who had regular problems, whether it was marital problems or problems with faith, and that's where the sort of modern graphic novel came into be, because Will decided that you don't have to tell these grand superhero stories. You can tell a personal story about your life that will be universal to other people.
So that takes me to the next part of this is moving forward as an editor, and at the house that you come from, how has the category expanded, or what do you see as the next natural development, or where we can really push to, maybe push is the wrong word, but to grow into?
I've been at Abrams for 11 years now, and when I first came to Abrams, I proposed doing an art book I wanted to do a trilogy, which I felt was, Jack Kirby, Harvey Kurtzman, and Will Eisner. And from those three, that's where comic books came. Jack Kirby for superhero comics, Harvey Kurtzman for humor and war comics, and Kurtzman for the Eisner for the personal graphic novel. And I first started with the Kirby book, and I pitched it at my meeting, and somebody said to me, so you want us to do an art book on an artist that nobody in this room has heard of but you? And my response was, that's the fault of the room, not the artist. You may not know the name, but a lot of people know the name, and certainly know the characters. And I think the biggest change is I don't have to argue that anymore. even if they don't know who Kirby is, they understand that this is a category that is really important one. And I think the growth for us is that we found a lot of success at Abrams in doing nonfiction. We did a book called Mom's Cancer. We did a book with Dirt Factor, My Friend Dahmer. We did a book called Economics, which is a Times bestseller. So our nonfiction titles have been really very strong for us. I'm not going to publish superhero stuff. I can't compete with DC and Marvel or create a generic superhero, but I can work in the field of nonfiction and publish something really that's definitive, like the book Economics, which became a bestseller because it was an easy way to understand the economy. We're doing literary adaptations, Octavia Butler's Kindred, books like that, where there's already an audience and there's already a familiarity with the subject, and it's a diverse, multicultural story, and I think that there's an opportunity to publish into that market. I think it's really about publishing very different stories that you don't typically think of.
So that's going to take me to Kate, is that I think you're probably young enough that you were born after several of us got into this industry. And then working, not to teach you about that, but working in this industry now where you're coming from as an educator librarian, which I think is truly your role, is what are the challenges you face? Is it not enough content, or is it receptiveness from administration for what you're trying to accomplish?
I'm really lucky, at least in my high school. We have 5 high schools in our district. At least at my high school, my admin is really supportive. They love that the kids are coming in and reading, and it doesn't matter what they're reading. A lot of schools are not that way. I'm just really lucky. And actually, my graphic novel circulation, the amount of books checked out, surpassed my regular fiction checkouts this year, and that was amazing. And I'd like to continue that. So I'm really lucky that I don't have a lot of challenges except obvious normal challenges like budget. If I could, like I have a cart right now sitting there, it's like $3,000 worth of graphic novels I would love to buy. But that's basically my only challenge, because I have a very supportive admin and receptive teachers for the most part, and actually really a lot of kids who are now visiting the library who I didn't see them before. They weren't my regulars, but now they are, because I have stuff that they're actually curious about and interested in.
Judy?
Yeah, I wanted to just say something that in terms of Will's legacy that I don't think ever really gets discussed. But I remember before Will died, we were talking about, okay, placement at retail for graphic novels, and how do we get them placed in a way that people want to pick them up. And Will was a big believer in doing, which retailers don't do anymore, but these cardboard stands where you could have a mixed display. And in his mind, he really wanted to have a mixed display where 6, 7, 8 of his books would all be cover out mixed display. Now at retail, because the floor space is so valuable, retailers don't do those. The other thing we talked about was spinner racks, so people could see the books face out rather than spine out. And that was, I think he was right in trying to figure out a way to get books cover out. What we have now is Amazon is really sort of the substitute for that. When you go onto Amazon, you can see the cover and you can take a peek inside the book. It's kind of replaced those spinner racks and those point of purchase displays. I wish you were alive to see that, because I think I'd be interested to hear what his comments would be about having that kind of quick access, because he thought a big part of selling was people being able to see just the cover and a page or two, take a peek at it. And it's a challenge for retailers, they only have so much floor space. And, you see these books with the spine out, but really these are books that you want to have out of the table, but at retail that table placement is expensive, that you pay per book.
It's funny you talk about the spine out. It's like, I spend a lot of time with our designer designing the spines of our books, because each one, that's another way that they live. And it's really important. When I look at other publishers, sometimes I'm like, I don't understand why they don't get that. That's part of the selling, is the spine. It's not an afterthought. It's part of the complete thought of how you're presenting a book from the front cover to the way it looks on this time.
And Kevin, this is not really that new for you, because early on you guys dealt with Viz, right, as far as distribution. What's the difference now between the go-go days of the first manga wave and then now for you?
Wow. Well, that was, during the, manga craze. And, the gatekeeper for that was really Borders. Kurt Hassler, the buyer at Borders, was the dominant buyer, and he basically sucked up most of our initial print runs. It took a while for Barnes & Noble actually to participate in the category, but once they jumped on the bandwagon, it was almost impossible to keep up with the demand that we were experiencing in the marketplace. It was just insane. But as I mentioned earlier, it was, with regard to the more independent booksellers, there wasn't any bandwidth really as far as print runs went for them to participate in it, so they were kind of left on the sidelines. And again, I think that there's still a vacuum to be filled there in terms of their ability to participate in the category. So I think it's, there's still great opportunity within our offering that we have. One of the publishers that we currently work with, called Icon, is our spinner racks we were talking about earlier, trying to get this content in front of people. They have a list of books that are all graphic and present content like Introduction to Existentialism, introducing Kierkegaard. So you have this natural evolution from what we were talking about with Will earlier to a place where we have a nonfiction rack with content of promoting philosophy, and it all is predicated on bringing a younger audience to this content that they otherwise wouldn't, because it's presented in a way that they can appreciate and understand. Those racks predominantly find their place in the comic market that we sell to. In fact, the comic store in Berkeley on Shattuck, where I am from, they have 2 racks, and they blow through the inventory. They're replenishing probably every other month. So I think that is an awesome trajectory from where Will started to where we are now. Does that make?
Yeah, it does. Judy?
Yeah, I just want to make one other point, which I think maybe is so evident and obvious with people, but maybe not, which is when you think about the Eisner effect on American publishing, and it's something that's happening tomorrow evening, the Eisner Awards. Will establishing the Eisner Awards, it lends credibility. It's an annual event. The Eisner Awards and the fact that there's such competition for them, and the publishing business, trade book publishing, especially driven by reviews and awards, right, Charlie? Right? So having these Eisner Awards every year, and they've just been, you look at the last 7 to 10 years of the books that have won the Eisner Awards. There's a real mix, but it's bringing these books to a greater attention because of that kind of recognition at the Eisner Awards. And I think that's a very important, long-lasting effect of Will Eisner's influence, is the fact that the Eisner Awards have continued. It's an institution here at SDCC. And I think that's really an important part of, we have Harvey Awards, but the Eisners really are the Cornerstone Awards for the industry. And the trade book publishers are very keen to get their books nominated and winning an Eisner Award.
I think we have a little bit more to go though, because I think that libraries and bookstores in the way, even in the online retailers, if they can have a section, it's like, Eisner Award winners, you can scroll, but their algorithm doesn't work that way. But, I think there's a little bit more. I agree with you that, having the Eisner Awards is, that's the comics Oscars, and, it was handed out for a long time by Will. It wasn't, the Oscars didn't get handed out by some guy an Oscar, but you got an award, an Eisner Award from Will Eisner. That really meant something, and it still means something, because the legacy and all the people who were involved are still involved. Carrying on where Will started. So I think it's really important. I know as a publisher, we have 7 awards tomorrow, I think, something like that. And, we're fingers crossed, and, if we don't win, that happens. You get 7 nominations and you don't get any, you'll be really bummed. But if you get one, it really, makes a big difference for the show.
Well, thank you for bringing the Eisner Awards into the conversation. Because something that occurred to me while both of you were talking is that there's some tipping point with the Eisner Awards and also with the American Library Association Awards, where graphic novels became more and more commonplace as far as titles being considered for major awards or winning major awards. But it also seems to coincide with the increased awareness in the library. How many librarians do we have in the room? How many people know what the American Library Awards are? Okay, got a few of those. What's interesting is that for the longest time, the Eisner Awards were a huge honor for the person who wrote or drew the books. In the American Library Association, when your book wins an award, there's an automatic purchasing mechanism within each one of the institutions where they take inventory. And so we're reaching a point where there are librarians who actually do have that in place for the graphic novels that make it onto the nomination list. Not just the awards, but the nominations themselves. And so do you guys see, is there a point that you can go to and say, in 2005, which is, I think the first year they had a librarian on it, 15 minutes? Thank you. When they had a librarian on the Eisner jury, did that change the way the awards are perceived? Or do you feel that from anybody's perspective here on how those awards became more relevant?
I don't know. I know that on Saturday morning, if a book wins an Eisner, at our booth at the Abrams booth, we see a lot more sales of the book after people come by to check it out. And I think one of the things that they do really well, Jackie Stroud will announce and check out the books, walk the floor, go to check out the winners. It would be nice if there was a booth that was just Eisner Award nominees that everybody can go to, and and then feature the actual winners, and then have signed copies. And the authors can do a signing on Saturday. I mean, I proposed that a couple of times. I don't know why it's never happened, but I don't know a publisher who wouldn't want to participate in that.
I'm taking notes.
Well, I think a continuation of that would be to get to a point where the Eisner means as much as a National Book Award or a Pulitzer. We just won the Pulitzer. Grove Atlantic, who Publishers Group West distributes, and we took about 55,000 orders in a matter of a day. Once we found out that we won that award. And maybe that's, our mission, to get to a place in the industry where we can bridge that divide between the award and what the award stands for, and how can we cultivate that in the retail marketplace, where we can take that to the market and get a greater level of response from book buyers. And
maybe we change the name from Eisner to Pulitzer.
Well, this takes me over to Kate, because there are certain things that there are certain requirements for books that she purchases. Do all the books for what you're doing in your library, do they all have to have awards, or does that give more credibility to the purchase?
It just gives more credibility. Like I said, I'm really lucky to have a supportive admin. So they basically said, hey, you're a librarian, do your librarian thing, we trust you. So I pay attention to what the kids are into, what they're asking for. I do look at lists of award winners, and that's how I base my decisions. And I like to buy award-winning books just because that does add a little more credibility, a lot more credibility, honestly. But I will buy any book within reason that a student is asking for, because that means they're interested and that means they're going to come back for more.
Can I do a bit of shameless promotion? The grant that she won, the ALA Will Eisner Grant novel grant, there were 2 libraries that won the entire collection of the Eisner-nominated titles, as well as funds to buy more graphic novels, $1,000 to host an event, and plus a travel stipend to get them to the American Library Association summer event. And so, what was the reaction when you brought those books in?
The kids were, like, you can kind of see my back workroom from the front circulation desk, and the kids were like, what? Because the books were like stacked on top of the desk, and it's like, where are these coming from? It was great. And then my really active library users would be like, can I come back and look? I hadn't even cataloged them, hadn't even processed them. They were like, save this one for me, save this one for me. It was just the warm, glowy feeling you get when a kid is excited about the books you just got. It's just fantastic.
Okay, my one last question to each of you. Are we now at the point where we're no longer defending comics as literature? I mean, are we done with that fight, or do we still have more to go? I'll start with you, Charlie.
Well, I think we won that a long time. I don't think anybody,
And on the other end,
I don't think anybody qualifies, comics as not real books. I mean, I don't hear that anymore. I don't know if anybody else does, but there's not. I think it's reading. It's always been reading. My personal experience, I was very lucky. I had parents who didn't care if I was reading comics or books. As long as I was reading, and I think that's true right now. So no, I don't think we have that problem.
But I think that ties back to your perspective of buyers who are not that comfortable with the category.
Yeah, and I think that your experience perhaps is probably dictated a little bit too by your association perhaps with when you're a kid. I would say that we still, based on our content, still find it somewhat of a challenge. I was talking about the series of books that we distribute, that Icon produces. And we everywhere we place a display, it sells out. But there's still a lot of resistance in the marketplace.
Is that on the retail side or?
On the retail side. So I think that there's still a lot of doors that need to be pushed in, but I do think that we've made a lot of headway.
Do you know where specifically on the retail side? Because I think Barnes & Noble, Jim Killen's a big champion, and you mentioned Curtis Borders when it was around, but the independents seem to really embrace comics.
I think it all depends on where that is. You've got those key voices in every city, major metro, whether it's Chat the Cover or the Strand, or there's places where they are involved. And a friend of mine, one of my favorite graphic novel librarians, said it's kind of like the same thing with the Dewey Committee. Is Dewey will change as soon as those people die. Kind of wrong, but it's true, or is it saying it's true? All right, if anybody has any questions, I think we've got a couple minutes left. If you have any questions, we'll be happy to take them. If not, did you learn stuff when you were here? Give me a round of applause. Okay, Carl Roper is here along with his wife Nancy, and they manage Will's estate, and it's a pleasure. Full disclosure, I actually do work with Carl and Nancy on helping with developing the ALA program for the grants, and it's been a lovely partnership with them as well. So go ahead, Carl.
A question for Mr. Kochman. if you do win an Eisner, you actually see an increase in sales. Significant increase in sales.
Not significant, I wouldn't say. I think it's perception in-house, and certainly at the show the next day, yes, for for Saturday and Sunday, and then I think that obviously going back in-house to support when you go back to the office, and I think that what you see is Diamond. If we approach Diamond, like Diamond will come to us and say like, oh, you want to know Eisner Award? We noticed that we should go more. But we have a rep now that we've hired for the last couple of years who then, on Monday will go to Diamond and say, this book won, do you have copies of it? How many do you want to order? And we reach out to, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all the other, places. So we do it, but I wouldn't say it's significant. It's certainly not the Pulitzer where that's like, that's different because I think that's cultural in the way that, as big as a cultural thing is that Comic-Con is, it's like the Eisner Awards is still not the Pulitzer Prize. And that makes sense.
This gentleman over here.
Yeah, hi. I'm Clayton Moore. I used to be on the Comic-Con committee back in the 70s when they had the Ink Pop Award, their original award. That's kind of been relegated behind the Eisners now. And it seems like there's a lot of Eisners given out.
Well, categories, yes, there are right now 27 categories.
And there's different committees that vote on these things. It's almost kind of obscure.
Not so much. For the Eisner Awards, it's 5 people on the jury.
Okay.
But they have the retail. That might be where the confusion comes in, because there's the Eisner Retail Award, the Spirit Award, and the book category. But you lead me to something that actually I've been meaning to ask. Well, actually, I was kind of getting ready to drop it here. Is the value of a Book of the Year award, because there's nowhere in the industry, whether it's the Kurtzmans or any other con, that has a true Book of the Year award. There's a bunch of categories. How would you feel about that? Whether it's all those, like the Oscars, all those movies that are nominated for stuff are all qualified for
Every movie is eligible for Best Movie of the Year.
Exactly, yes.
I'm not sure you can find a consensus on that, but...
I know, it's a great thing to argue about.
But sure, but in terms of an award, I'm just saying the evolution of the Ink Pop Award has kind of been...
But what's the difference between the environment there of the Ink Pot Awards, that era?
Jack Kirby is an Ink Pot Award.
Right.
These guys used to get their Ink Pot Awards at the bank.
Right.
Now they get them before their panel starts. Oh, by the way, here's your Ink Pot. Thank you for coming. Instead of, as the Eisners are presented, with the formality, and you get the reception speeches, which sometimes have powerful moments in them.
Right.
And so as an award, it has evolved.
Right.
In my experience here, I want to convey that. And the retail value of it sounds rather nominal. Whereas the Ink Pop Award winners, they were not developing marketing in mind. It was like, hey, look what great work there is, to showcase the work.
Right.
I think that's valid. I think that that's the point I was trying to make. I wasn't really suggesting that the Eisner is the Pulitzer. I think that what I was suggesting is I think that there's room for us in the marketplace to find ways to sell, more comics, graphic novels as a result of the content receiving an award. And I think that there's room to educate people about the award.
And I think the value of
have that status. I'm just saying the Eisner Award, as it has become the signature award of Comic-Con, okay?
Right.
They're fine, but they need, perhaps it needs to get recognized as such more broadly.
But I think
they have the impact of the Pulitzer.
One of the
people know what a Pulitzer is. In my English class, they don't. I tell them it's like the Oscar for books.
Right.
It's the best award you can get, the top of the line, for journalism and for nonfiction and for fiction. It's like Doonesbury won the Pulitzer. It's still in the paper.
But one of the things that ties into this is for, in the public library market, awards weight the decision of buying, and as it does in retail, correct? The better recognition that book has for whatever it's been given makes that purchase easier for the retailer and or the librarian. And this gentleman in the back has his hand up.
I was saying at retail, I don't see any retailers ordering any books anymore because they want an Eisner award.
Comic shop or
No,
retail?
Comic shop.
Comic shop. And that, I understand that. I understand that. It's one of the conversations that we were having at Diamond when I was working the books distribution side is how do we make that relevant also for the comic shops? Yes, sir.
I'm a retailer as well, and I would tell you that every once in a while in the Diamond catalog, there was a page that had a backlist and showed all the covers of all previous Eisner Award winners. I would have customers that would say, "Oh, I didn't know about that. Can you get me one of those?" Or then I would, if there was that list, I'd stock all those titles because I know all of a sudden everybody's going to see it in the Diamond catalog.
Right.
So there's not enough awareness of the previous winners. And, you know, I get new people in my store constantly now. So if there's these kind of crossover books that would interest a lot of these people, it would sell, but they have to find out about them in the first place.
That's the marketing part. Yes.
Yeah, and you got to figure out the logistics of that. So I think that's a good point, but, you know, so who's picking up that ad? If I'm at Abrams, I'm going to advertise my book, but that doesn't mean that Norton or somebody else is going to advertise their winners. So maybe it's this kind of thing that the Eisner Committee takes out that ad in previews because it's on their behalf and their best interest that we highlight these, and then the more copies you sell to Diamond, the more, you know, it helps
The black and
everybody.
white full-page ad is going to be $700.
Right.
You get a lot into that one page.
Yep.
Yeah, you can.
No, that's a good point.
All right. Anything else? Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you very much. Really appreciate you guys coming to join us this afternoon. And if you'd like to have questions of these fine folks up here, we'll meet out in the hallway. Enjoy the rest of the conference.